My theme was the state and the northern social economy. And it had, as it worked out, a number of, I can only call them elements or aspects. And all of the projects that I'm going to tell you about and that the students will be talking about later kind of work to straddle various of these elements. So this is more like at the highest level, conceptual level, how I conceived working on this project. Quite a bit of effort has gone into establishing a policy history. That is, what are the sequence of events undertaken by Aboriginal governments, by territorial and local governments, and by the federal government that had an impact on the evolution of the northern social economy in small communities and in the larger, predominantly wage centers. The biggest research challenge is finding a way, especially for the historical material, to understand the impacts of those policies. You can find out with work, but fairly readily, what the sequence of actions were that these various states undertook. It's much harder to understand how those were felt in the North and what their short and long-term effects were. And it's still the biggest research challenge, but as I speak, you'll see that we have devised some ways to get at this. A third important aspect is trying to understand the social innovations in Indigenous communities. Say if you let your mind think back about 60 or 70 years, over that whole period, there has been a far more than just reaction and adaptation going on in the predominantly Indigenous communities. There's been the invention of new ways of interacting with the forces that came from outside. And understanding that is something that is going to take much longer than probably the rest of my life. But we are making a start at thinking about, based on what all of us have been able to learn, thinking about what concepts we need to just begin to capture those points. Another and a slightly more straightforward aspect of this is to look at the history of the social economy in places like Yellowknife, in the towns that were established by the settler societies. And finally, all of us have been thinking about issues of poverty and wealth and where the social economy fits in there. There's a panel after the coffee break addressing exactly that question, issues of poverty. Okay, next slide. So the people who did most of this research are listed here. You're going to hear from Nick Falvo, Josh Gladstone, Sheena Kennedy, and Jerry Saban, actually twice today. And that is, Jerry will be twice. And so I will say a little bit about what everybody has done, but you can see from that list what their projects were. These are master's and doctoral students at Carleton, and Jerry's now at the University of Toronto. Now I want to talk about the projects, and I haven't organized this by person so much as by topic. So one of the ways that I've been trying to get at understanding what the impact of various state initiatives has been locally in various localities is to examine and first find and then examine the various repositories of already collected oral history. Lots of oral history has been collected, and much of it has been translated. In various parts of the North there are repositories. And so we haven't done anything with this, anything significant yet with what you can learn by examining the oral histories, but the idea is to find testimonies that people left or knowledge that they left in the form of recorded oral history that talks about the impact of various big initiatives or what things were like in certain times, to put it simply. So that's a long-term project. It's something I intend to be working on for the next several years. We've really just begun. The second project is based using archival information. And you can see that each of the students has, in a different way, used the archives, often the archives right here in Yellowknife, to fill in some of the blanks, especially about the early years. this question of getting at the theme of change and innovation in Indigenous societies is of course, it's a very complex and large project. I have no illusions that we'll do something definitive here, but it seemed important, it seems more important to me as we go along to at least offer up some examples so that people can understand how dynamic the process has been in Indigenous communities. It's very common in writing about Indigenous communities and colonialism to just talk about the bad effects and then the bad things that were done, and then the dysfunctional circumstances that you can find in some places. But that is far from the only story, and it shouldn't be the only narrative about what's going on. So it's an exercise in retrieval and documenting things that aren't often documented, and it's going on in different ways. Sheena Kennedy will be talking about the work that we've been doing in Igloolik this afternoon, so you'll hear about that. The study in Repulse, which we had a lot of support from Mary, has been finished, but that was the documentation of a very successful co-op that has had an important long-term benefit in the community of Repulse. So it's a community adaptation of an institution that was introduced from the South, but that became a central part of life in that community. Deborah Simmons, who's here, is going to be talking tomorrow about the work that she and her team have been doing in Delaney. And the enormous value of that work is that because of the team that she has, they've been able to do the work in the Dene language, so that the concepts that become available from their work are concepts that eventually the rest of us will be able to use to understand once we learn what they are and what they mean. This is very painstaking, difficult work, but it's probably the only way to get to find out the most important things. And we've started to do some innovative work with published sources, with other ways to get at these questions. And that work is still going on. I'll be glad to send you a bibliography if anybody's keen. The fourth one has the work on that here in Yellowknife has involved Jerry Sabin's work on the history of the social economy, and more recently with Alternatives North. Nick has been working on housing and homelessness, and many of you have met him, I'm sure, in that regard. Nick Falvo, he'll be talking about his own work as well. Finally, I think the work that all of us have been doing are going to help us understand some of the important features of our current economic condition in the North, but in Canada as well. And as Mike was referring to, the important role of the social economy or the third sector, especially as we go into hard times. It's going to be different in the North in many ways. People in the North are much better off than people in the rest of Canada because they still have access to food and other goods from the land. They still have all the skills that mostly have been lost by urban dwellers. But that doesn't mean there isn't poverty. And so a careful and empirical consideration of disparities in wealth and the sources of poverty is probably where this theme, the state and the social economy, will take all of us in the end. We hope to contribute to that discussion in the years ahead. I'm going to conclude with, I think there's 3 slides left, give you an idea of what some of the general findings are. Each of us have, as a first obligation, have produced a report, or usually they're reports, for our community research partners. So Sheena completed a socioeconomic baseline study in Igloolik. Nick worked with Arlene to produce Arlene Hashia, to produce a policy report on homelessness issues in Yellowknife, and so on. So the first product was always a document that we thought useful, or that we learned would be useful to the partners we were working with. And then after that, we have a program of academic publication planned to make the knowledge more generally available. So this, again, is at pretty high level, but these are, if you stand back and look at the corpus of the work that the graduate students have done and that others of us have been working on, here are some general findings. I've been making the point about the importance of the mixed economy, and Brenda's work is directly in that line as well. So is Dave's, and you can see where our hearts are. There's, the second one is really important for those of you who are interested in policy decisions or what political choices confront the residents of the North now. All of us are limping along with an inaccurate and incomplete understanding of the nature of the Northern economy. Probably the best empirical data is here in the Northwest Territories because you have the labor force survey and other research. But even there, there's a problem of conceptual development and understanding what the dynamic is of that economy. So we plan to work on that. There's some work in, some finding from just retrieving information about the voluntary sector or the third sector. You can see how important that sector has been to the shaping the northern society that we live in, something everybody always knew intuitively. But once you document it, you realize how incomplete the standard story of northern development is, where you have the big state and the big corporations and the people living in localities, in small communities. It's not nearly a complete story. So I believe that this history of the voluntary sector or the social economy is going to give us a way of talking about northern development that's a lot more accurate. Next slide. So in the end, I think that what all of this work will do will be to provide people with a longer list of options than simply being able to say yes or no to major project decisions. That's no way to plan a northern economy or anybody's economy. You need to think about social well-being in a systematic way, and that has to start from the strengths of that are already actually there in the community. Those should not be ignored. So if we're able to kind of read the social economy in to our understandings of history and of the economy, we should generate more realistic and likely to succeed choices. People should be able to actually have choices about not just a project, but about the longer term shape of their society. And that's the point of all this work on the state and the northern social economy, is to fill out the history so that it's easier to conceive of those choices.